what would happen if faith was not just an idea nurtured in the mind, but a living force that constantly demands action in every step and every decision. I have seen many people claim that they believe, yet the way they live betrays the words they speak. I have come to understand that true faith does not allow a life to stop at repeating words, but must become blood flowing in the veins, breath in the chest, and concrete action in the hands. This is precisely what James sought to convey, a call not gentle but urgent, a blueprint to transform faith into visible form. I clearly see his words when he wrote, "Do not merely listen to the word, but do what it says, because listening without doing is deceiving yourself." I too have been reminded of this, that in life, words alone do not save if they are not accompanied by deeds. I have observed the human soul and realized that faith always leaves a tangible mark. Otherwise, it is only a shadow without life. When you believe, you must inevitably become a doer, because everything you affirm with your mouth becomes meaningless if not proven by choices and actions. I see James, the brother of Jesus, a man who once doubted his own brother, but after witnessing the resurrection, became a pillar of the church, a leader who endured persecution and ultimately died for that faith. His life itself is evidence that faith can transform a doubter into a steadfast one, can turn an outsider into a living witness. I understand why his words carry such weight, because he did not write from theory, but from the experience of a life utterly changed. When he wrote about faith, he knew the cost to be paid. He knew the feeling of being torn between two minds, and he chose to waver no longer. His words challenge each of us that faith cannot remain still. It must move. It must manifest in everyday choices. I have sensed in many souls both a longing and a fear. They want to believe but do not dare to act. They want to hear but do not dare to do. James has told us plainly, faith without works is dead. I have seen this in those who pray much but never change their way of life, in those who know the scriptures by heart but cannot forgive their neighbor. The death of faith does not lie in its disappearance, but in its lack of effect, a seed sown that never grows. It is useless. In the same way, faith that does not lead to action is only an empty shell. I deeply sense that this is the truth James revealed to us. He calls for a life not only of knowing, but of doing, not only of speaking, but of acting, not only of keeping hidden, but of revealing. Faith must be seen, not to boast, but to prove that it is alive. I recall my own experience when many times I prayed to God and forgot that He required me to walk in that prayer. I have seen visions within the soul that one cannot separate what one believes from how one lives. For these two are bound together like breath and life. If breath stops, the body dies. If action ceases, faith dies. I tell you this, when you walk on this path, you will see the difference, because each of your actions becomes the confirmation of the faith you proclaim. No one can deny the evidence of a transformed life. One who once hated now loves. One who once deceived now lives honestly. One who once lived for self now dares to sacrifice for others. This is the power of living faith. James is not just a name in history. He is the brother of Jesus, a man who once doubted, who once stood on the outside looking in, but after the resurrection became the pillar of the church in Jerusalem. And his very transformation is evidence that true faith can change an entire life. I see him move from doubt to surrender, from a family member to a witness willing to die for what he believed. And this gives every word he wrote a weight that no theorist could ever create. Because he lived, he suffered, he knew, and he paid the price. So when he says, become doers and not hearers only, it is a call flowing from a heart that once resisted faith but was finally conquered by truth. I understand that many may ask why he has the authority to speak to us so directly, and I answer that it is because he himself walked through the struggle between blood ties and divine mystery. He once did not believe his own brother. He once saw Jesus only as a member of the family, and that doubt was not theory, it was the reality of kinship. But then he faced the undeniable event, the resurrection, and from that moment he was no longer the same. He became the leader of a community under persecution, under poverty, under danger, and his words were written in that harsh context, not to soothe but to awaken. I see in his words urgency, directness, no room for circling around, no room for compromise. He challenges us to look at the root of life, to ask whether the faith we speak of truly steps out into action, or whether we are still living double-minded, holding on to God, yet refusing to let go of the world. And he points this out with powerful words. Come near to God, and he will come near to you. Wash your hands, purify your hearts, and stop being double-minded, for you cannot love darkness and love light at the same time. I have seen countless souls torn by this double-mindedness. They pray in the morning but live as if they never knew God in the afternoon. They sing praises in church, but outside they gossip, they covet, they deceive. And I understand that this contradiction drains faith of its power, because two springs cannot pour forth from one source. Two kinds of fruit cannot grow from one root. And James called out this disease by name. I clearly sense that this is not only an issue of his time, it is an issue for every generation, including you and me, because everyone at some point wants to divide life into compartments, one for kol, one for desire, one for ambition. And we think we can manage it, but the truth is we are losing wholeness, and the words of James cut straight through, calling for decisiveness, for choice, for complete commitment. I realize that faith is never just believing in the mind. It always demands a place in the heart and an expression in action. And if divided, its strength is drained, just as one who walks in two directions at once will never reach the destination. I have often seen in visions that those who walk with a single heart, though they face trials, though they face opposition, in the end they stand firm, while those who are double-minded, though they seem safe, soon collapse in the day of testing. Therefore, when James writes about double-mindedness, he is not trying to make things hard for us. He wants to save us from a meaningless life, a life that never reaches the purpose God intended. I also sense that when we choose wholeheartedness, the promise is always true, that if we draw near to God, he will draw near to us. His presence is never far. It is only hidden by our own distraction and compromise. And when we cleanse, when we return, we find him standing right there. I know this is hard, because it requires letting go. It requires facing what we love that does not belong. It requires releasing false supports, but that is the condition for the power of faith to become reality. And this is what gives weight to the words of James, that he does not speak like a catechism teacher, but as a witness who has gone through, who knows what is empty and what is true. I have seen both the power and the danger of a divided heart, where a person wants to hold on to God, yet also satisfy the demands of the world. And this very state causes the soul to fall into instability, like a wave driven back and forth by the wind, without any firm direction. James pointed out this truth with words that cannot be ignored, that the double-minded person cannot expect to receive anything from God, because they do not stand on solid ground. They stand on cracked earth, ready to collapse at any time. I understand this not by theory, but by experience. I have seen many people pray, yet still keep doubt in their hearts. They speak of trust, but their actions reveal fear, and as a result, they never enter into the fullness. They seek. Double-mindedness is a silent disease. It is not always loud. Many times it shows only in small compromises, justifications, half-hearted choices, but these very things rob the soul of clarity and leave it in paralysis. I remember visions where there were souls shining brightly when they chose to be wholehearted, and there were others dimmed because they wanted to keep both sides, and the light in them grew weaker until it could no longer shine. I tell you that God does not demand perfection in every detail, but He requires wholeness in the direction of the heart. And if you continue to let your heart be divided, you will never know what true peace is. I have witnessed many people come to me seeking explanations for the turmoil in their souls, and I realize that the root of all turmoil is double-mindedness, because the soul cannot follow two calls at once. One is the call of God. The other is the call of self and the world, and when they try to hold both, they only fall into exhaustion and dryness. James gave a straightforward solution. Draw near to God. Wash your hands. Purify your hearts. Stop playing the role of being righteous in words while living deceitfully in action. And this decisiveness is the only way to restore the strength of faith. I understand that many fear decisiveness because it means letting go of habits, of hidden agreements, of temporary pleasures. But think carefully. Do you really want to remain forever torn? Sometimes zealous, sometimes cold, sometimes praying, sometimes turning away? Or do you want to know the firm peace that only a wholehearted life can bring? I sense that double-mindedness not only kills faith, it also corrodes character, because the double-minded person is no longer consistent, easily changing promises, easily betraying themselves, easily selling what is sacred for something cheap. And this lack of consistency makes them lose credibility before others and lose trust in themselves. I have heard many complain that they do not feel God close, but it is they themselves who have built the wall of double-mindedness. And only when they are willing to break that wall would His presence again become clear. I remind you that in every age, the testing of faith always targets this very point. Whether you will stand wholehearted or whether you will try to keep both sides, whether you will choose full light or still hold on to a bit of darkness for comfort. James does not accept the gray zone because he knows that the gray zone kills the soul faster than darkness. For it creates the illusion that you are still walking with God when in fact you have already strayed. Faith becomes strong only when it passes through trials, just as gold becomes pure only when it passes through fire. And that is why James wrote that trials should be considered pure joy, because he knew that true strength is not formed in easy days, but in days when the soul is pressed to its limits. And within those very limits, a perseverance is born, a perseverance that is not passive endurance, but a hidden power that makes the soul grow, mature, lacking nothing necessary for a complete life. Many people think that faith will help them avoid suffering, but the truth is that suffering becomes the environment where faith is proven, not for God to know whether we truly believe, because He already knows, but for us to recognize whether our faith is true or false, strong or weak, deep-rooted or shallow, on the surface. When James said to rejoice in trials, he did not deny pain. He did not tell us to laugh while tears fall, but he pointed to a deeper vision, that trials are the instrument of God to carve out qualities in us that peace could never produce, that the very fire of sorrow becomes the hand of the Creator, shaping us into the form He destined from the beginning. I have witnessed souls collapse in trials because they thought it was punishment. And I have also seen souls shine in the same hardship because they understood it was training. And the only difference was perspective, The one who sees trials as punishment falls. The one who sees trials as a journey walks through and matures. That is why James wrote that perseverance, when it finishes its work, makes you mature and complete, lacking nothing. Because faith does not grow through easy lessons, but through real struggles with fear, with loss, with questions that do not have immediate answers. In those moments, wisdom becomes the greatest need. And James reminds that if anyone lacks wisdom, they should ask, and God will give generously without reproach, but on one condition, that they ask in faith without doubting, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea blown and tossed by the wind. Such a person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. I clearly understand that trials do not only test endurance, they test trust. And it is trust that determines whether you receive new strength or collapse in doubt. In the darkest days, when one sees no way out, this promise becomes light, that there is a source of wisdom always ready for those who truly seek, a wisdom not of empty theory but of practical guidance, lighting each step, supporting each decision. And this is the priceless gift God gives to those who trust Him, even in the storm. Remember that this wisdom is not like the knowledge of the world. It does not teach you how to avoid suffering, but how to walk through suffering with open eyes, to see what is being built within. And for this reason, it can bring peace even when circumstances have not yet changed. James knew well that finding joy in trials is not easy, and therefore he based it on perseverance and wisdom. Perseverance keeps you standing. Wisdom helps you understand meaning, and the two together create a faith that cannot be shaken. I have realized that in life, trials are not exceptions, but the rule. Everyone will face them in different ways, some in loss, some in sickness, some in betrayal, some lost in their own minds. But the question is not why trials come, but how you will respond. And that very response shapes who you become. When you choose to see trials as an opportunity to grow, you are walking with James on the path. He pointed out the path that turns sorrow into strength, suffering into maturity, loss into opportunity to receive new grace. Wisdom is not something humans can manufacture through experience or cleverness. Wisdom is a gift from God, given to those who know their own lack and dare to ask in faith. James wrote that if anyone lacks wisdom, let him ask, and God will give generously without reproach. But ask with a wholehearted faith, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind, never able to stand firm. And I know this word is true because I have seen many souls come pleading in confusion. They want clarity, but they do not truly believe that God will give, and the result is that they receive only more turmoil instead of light. Wisdom from above is not the same as worldly understanding. Worldly understanding always aims at immediate benefit. The wisdom of God aims at the maturity of the soul. It teaches you not only to find an escape, but to find meaning in every adversity. It does not give you the shortest path to escape suffering, but gives you eyes to see the value of trials. And this is what makes it different. I know that many people think wisdom can be learned from books or from those with much experience. That is true to a point. But true wisdom, the kind of wisdom that makes a person steadfast in the storm, comes only from direct connection with God, because He does not give according to human standards. He gives according to the standard of eternity, and so that wisdom opens for us a completely new perspective on life. Many times I have been shown that in the moments when a soul kneels down, when they no longer trust their own understanding, a stream of light from above is poured out, and from that moment they see trials differently. Suffering does not disappear immediately, but fear disappears, and instead comes a strange steadiness, because they have received wisdom to see that God is still at work even in the darkness. That is why James emphasized that we must ask, but we must believe. because faith is the only door that opens that stream of wisdom. Without faith, a prayer is only an echo falling into nothingness. With faith, a prayer becomes the key that opens the treasure. And the difference between these two states determines whether your life goes into confusion or into peace. I have meditated much on the image of the sea wave that James used, the wave blown back and forth without direction. That is the picture of a double-minded soul, one day believing, one day doubting, 1 hour praying, 1 hour worrying, and the result is that they never move forward. They remain stuck in the cycle of restlessness, but the single-hearted are different. They place the whole weight of their lives on the promise of God. And when they do so, they stand firm, not because they are stronger than others, but because they cling to the one who never changes, and in that clinging they find wisdom to keep walking. I also understand that wisdom from God is never separated from humility, because the proud think they already have enough. They do not ask and they do not receive, but the humble know that their mind is limited, their heart easily strays, and this very admission opens the flow of grace, making them receive guidance that others cannot see. When you ask for wisdom, you are not only asking for clarity to solve a problem, you are asking for the eyes of God, asking for His way of seeing the situation. And when you have that vision, everything is different. The enemy is no longer only one who harms you, but becomes an opportunity to learn forgiveness. Loss is no longer only pain, but becomes an opportunity to learn to hold on to eternal things. Hardship is no longer a dead end, but becomes a stepping stone for your faith to grow. That is why James placed wisdom right after speaking about trials, because without wisdom, you will see trials as disaster. But with wisdom, you will see trials as a tool, and that difference shapes how you walk through the storm. I have seen many souls receive wisdom in tears, and through that wisdom, they not only rose up for themselves, but became light for others. They showed the whole community how to live true faith, not with empty words, but with steadfast life. Faith cannot only stay in the mouth. If it is real, it must flow out in action. And this is where James struck the very root, that a faith without deeds is dead, like a body without breath, soulless and motionless. I have witnessed many people proud that they believe, they confess, they recite prayers, but when faced with the concrete needs of others, they turn away. And at that very moment, their faith is exposed as an empty shell. James gave a simple but irrefutable example that if a brother lacks clothes or food, and you only say to them, be at peace, be warm, but do nothing, then that blessing has no value. It is only a meaningless echo. I understand that true faith is like a healthy seed sown into good soil. It will grow by itself. It will sprout. It will bear flowers and fruit. No one needs to push it. It will naturally produce if it is alive. If there are no deeds, no fruit. It means the seed has died at the root. And the same is true for a soul that claims belief but never changes its way of living. True faith always creates movement. It stirs the heart to compassion. It urges the hands to help. It opens the mouth to speak words of building up. And if none of these happen, then that faith is only a name, not a reality. I have meditated often on the difference between believing in the existence of God and believing God, because James made it clear that even demons believe there is one God. They even tremble. But that belief does not transform them. It does not lead to submissive action. Therefore, it does not save. Saving faith must be proven by steps of obedience, by concrete choices, to follow the ways of God. I have seen in visions that the light of faith is always accompanied by the image of working hands, because that light does not remain still. It shines into action to prove itself true. Think of Abraham. He was called righteous not only because of words of trust, but because he put his son on the altar. An act full of pain, but also evidence of absolute faith. And that obedience completed his faith. Likewise, Rahab, a person despised in society, became an example of faith because she dared to act to hide the spies. That very deed proved that she believed in the power of God, and by it she was remembered in the history of faith. These two examples show clearly that faith and deeds are not two separate things. They merge like breath and life, and when combined, they produce true righteousness. I have seen many people avoid this. They say, I believe, but they keep that belief locked inside the church. In the prayer time, while outside, they live as if they do not know God. And I know that this is a tragedy, because they have deceived themselves, holding a corpse of faith without life. James forced us to face the uncomfortable question that if others look at your life, will they see a faith that works or a dead faith? This is a question that cannot be avoided, because truth always appears in action. I affirm that if you truly believe, you cannot sit still when you see others suffering. You cannot remain indifferent before need. You cannot continue living in selfishness, because living faith compels the heart to act, compels the hands to open, compels the feet to walk. This is not a call to add a few more works into your schedule to prove you believe, but an emphasis that true faith will naturally give birth to deeds, just like a healthy tree naturally produces fruit. If there is no fruit, no action, then the problem is not lack of works, but that the root has died. I have deeply sensed that this is the sword that cuts through hypocrisy, because many like to keep faith in the mouth but do not want it to flow into the hands. And James brought them back to reality, that words do not save, only deeds proving faith save. I cannot read the passage about Abraham and Rahab and see it merely as classic stories retold for amusement. With Abraham, there was a command that was difficult to accept, the sacrifice of his only son, something anyone would consider insane and unreasonable. Yet he did not demand an explanation from heaven. He did not need to see the outcome beforehand. He simply walked forward with a reckless determination, because he knew the one he believed in is faithful. His faith was not a concept on his lips. It became a true movement, fastening his feet on the path up the mountain, tightening his hand as he lifted the knife. I see in that the close unity between faith and action. Faith, if it remains only as an idea, will always be a shadow, but when it is transformed into a concrete decision, it becomes evidence. That is why Abraham is called the father of those who believe. He was not displaying piety or showing off sacrifice. He simply obeyed, even when he had to step into the most incomprehensible command. The story of Rahab is the opposite. In background and position, she was not within the covenant people. She was an outsider, a person whom society placed little hope in. But when the two Israelite spies came, she did not choose the safe option for herself. She dared to hide them, to deceive her own authorities, to accept danger simply because she recognized the truth coming with that people. Rahab had not been trained in the law. She did not know all the commands, but she trusted that the God of Israel is the true God, and that was enough to make her act. Faith here was not something vague. It was sealed by a concrete action, a risk, and that is exactly what made her name mentioned in the lineage of the Savior. When placing Abraham and Rahab side by side, I see a common point that cannot be ignored. Faith and deeds are not two different books recording two kinds of merits. They are like two sides of the same sheet of paper, inseparable. A person may say he believes, but if that belief leaves no trace in action, then it is only empty words. Conversely, an outward religious act that does not arise from trust is only an empty shell. True faith when rooted in the heart, will inevitably sprout above the ground. And action is the sign of recognition. I ask myself, if Abraham only said he believed, but did not place Isaac on the altar, would anyone remember him? If Rahab only said she feared the Lord, but then handed over the spies to the king of Jericho, would her name be recorded? The courage of faith is precisely to go beyond words, to overcome fear and the calculation of safety. True faith always brings about true deeds, because otherwise that faith was never born. What challenges me is that my own faith often stops at the level of concept. It is easy for me to say, I believe in the power of God, but when I must choose to give up something precious, am I willing to walk forward? It is easy for me to sing that I trust, but when I must risk for the truth, do I have enough courage? Abraham and Rahab were not given a script in advance. They only had one opportunity to prove faith through action, and they did not miss it. From that, I understand more that faith is not a passport exempting from action. It is the engine that makes me walk, that makes me dare to live differently, dare to sacrifice, dare to choose the difficult path. Deeds are not for earning merit or proving piety, but are the inevitable result of a living faith, just as a tree cannot only have roots without producing leaves. Faith cannot remain hidden in the heart without leaving footprints in reality. I look at Abraham, a father placed in the ultimate test, yet still choosing obedience. I look at Rahab, a despised woman, yet becoming a witness to trust. Neither of them was perfect, but both show that true faith never stands still. It always creates movement. It creates a mark. It creates tangible evidence. That is the unity of faith and deeds. I cannot read these stories and then turn away as if they were only distant memories. They shine into my life today, forcing me to ask, what footprints is my faith leaving on the earth? Abraham was called righteous not only because he declared belief in God, but because he did what no one dared to do. He placed his son on the altar and put all his trust in the goodness of the one who had promised. That very act showed that faith is not a theory in the mind, but a power leading to absolute obedience. And I know that when James mentioned Abraham, he wanted all of us to understand that faith always seeks a place to express itself. It never stops at feelings or words. In the same way, Rahab, a foreign woman without status, dared to risk her life to hide the spies, and that very act became evidence that she believed in the power of God. Her faith did not need reputation or position to prove itself. It revealed itself through risky obedience in the harshest situation. I realize that these two examples stand at opposite poles, one a patriarch, the other a foreign woman, yet both are remembered for the same reason. They believed and acted. They did not let their faith drift in thought, but turned it into real choice. And that is exactly the point James wanted to emphasize, that no matter who you are, what status or background you have, true faith will always require concrete action to prove it. I have reflected many times on this truth, that God does not seek a faith that only speaks. He seeks a faith that walks. And when a person acts because of faith, that very act becomes a language louder than any sermon. It testifies more powerfully than any words. It has the power to touch others in a way that words alone never can. James calls us to stop living by empty promises. For a faith without deeds is dead. It is like a body without breath. And if you keep it in your mind without bringing it into action, then you are keeping a lifeless corpse. I have seen in the Spirit that true faith will not let you rest when you see others in misery. It will urge you to open your hand. It will make you restless until you act. And if there is no such restlessness, you need to examine whether your faith is truly alive. Abraham stepped into the absurd when he obeyed God. Rahab stepped into danger when she stood with his people, both proved that faith and deeds cannot be separated. They're like two sides of a coin. And if one side is missing, then that coin has no value. I want you to understand that when you act because of faith, you are not adding merit to yourself. You are proving the life within, and that is what makes your faith become light to the world. Many people mistakenly think that deeds save us, but James did not say that. He only emphasized that true faith will always produce deeds, just as a healthy tree will always bear fruit. If you see a tree that never bears fruit, it has no life. Likewise, a faith that never shows in action has been dead long ago. I have sensed that the key point is not to add good works to prove, but to let faith lead you naturally into action. You will find yourself showing mercy when seeing someone in need. You will find yourself forgiving when you could have held on to resentment. You will find yourself giving when you had the chance to keep. And all these acts are not for boasting, but are the natural flow of a living faith. This is what makes James sharp and distinctive, for he does not let us hide behind easy answers. He pulls us out of the darkness of self-deception. He forces us to look into ourselves and ask whether the faith we confess truly has evidence in life. Abraham and Rahab still speak to us today. They remind us that true faith is always risky. It always leads to actions beyond logic. And if you only want to keep a safe faith, one that demands no sacrifice, then that faith has never lived. Wisdom from heaven is completely different from worldly wisdom, because worldly wisdom is born out of envy and selfish ambition. It leads to disorder and every evil practice. But wisdom from heaven is first of all pure, then peace, loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and producing good fruit, impartial and sincere. And I know that this very contrast exposes the nature of two paths, one leading to division and insecurity, the other leading to peace and righteousness. I have seen many people called intelligent, but their intelligence only brings jealousy. They compete, they compare, they look for ways to surpass others, and in the end what remains is only brokenness in relationships, while there are those who are simple with little education, but within them shines forth a wisdom that makes the whole community stable, because true wisdom is not measured by degrees or reputation. It is measured by the fruit it leaves in the lives and in the hearts of others. James did not say that wisdom is knowledge. He said wisdom is proved by a good life and deeds done in humility. And I understand that means true wisdom does not boast. It does not try to overwhelm others. It radiates natural peace. It brings building up rather than destruction. I know that worldly wisdom is often sweet at first, but bitter later. It promises shortcuts to success, but in the end it leaves burdens on the mind and emptiness in the soul. But wisdom from heaven is often hard to understand, sometimes slow, but it endues. It sows peace and reaps righteousness. It does not create wounds in relationships, but mends the broken pieces. It does not lead to bitterness, but brings healing. I have reflected that wisdom from heaven never separates from humility, because only the humble have enough room in their hearts to receive the guidance of God, while the proud are full of false self-confidence, and so leave no place for truth to enter. And this very thing makes them victims of their own intellect. I also understand that true wisdom does not lie only in words. It lies in the way of living, in how we treat others, in justice, in mercy, in the ability to keep peace when conflict arises. And that is the clearest evidence. Many times I have seen that wisdom from heaven is like a pure stream flowing through a dry field. It softens the soil, it helps the seeds sprout, and it does not create noise, but the results are clear, because wherever there is true peace, there is true wisdom. James also said that those who sow peace will reap a harvest of righteousness, and I believe this is a principle of heaven and earth. because peace is never meaningless. It always produces the fruit of righteousness. It changes the atmosphere. It transforms an environment full of conflict into a place where people can grow in justice and love. I remind you that there is no neutral path. Either you live by the wisdom from heaven, or you are swept along by worldly wisdom, and that choice will determine whether your life brings peace or chaos, righteousness or evil. No one can stand in the middle without being pulled to one side. I want you to examine yourself. What is the source of your motivation? If in your heart there is envy, ambition, then even if your actions appear wise, the final result will still be destruction. But if your motivation is humility, is love, then even if your steps are slow, in the end it will produce the fruit of righteousness. Wisdom from heaven always comes with purity. And I understand that this purity is not absolute perfection, but a heart without dark motives, not using truth for gain, not pretending to love, to hide an agenda. It is the sincerity that makes words and actions consistent, and this sincerity is the foundation of trust. If you want to receive this wisdom, start with humility. Pray, because God has promised that whoever asks will be given, but you must ask with full faith, and when you are given, you will notice the clear difference. You will see your heart become gentle when others are angry. You will see yourself able to forgive when others cannot. You will see yourself seeking to connect instead of divide, and that is the sign wisdom from heaven is working in you. Submitting to God and resisting the devil are two sides of the same command, because if you do not submit, you will have no strength to resist. And if you do not resist, then submission is false. James wrote, submit to God, resist the devil, and it will flee from you. And I know this word is not a slogan, but a key that opens true freedom, because many still live under the illusion that they have enough willpower to resist by themselves. But willpower is never enough to overcome the power of darkness. Only placing oneself under the lordship of God brings the strength to stand firm. I understand that submission is not surrender, not losing individuality, but an act of placing the soul in its right place, abandoning the illusion of control and letting the Creator take charge. And in the moment we yield ourselves into His hands, a new strength flows in. This strength does not come from our own effort, but from His presence in our hearts. I also know that the devil is not afraid of hypocrisy, not afraid of lifeless prayers. It only fears a soul truly standing in submission to God, because then it no longer faces a weak human. It faces the power of the Eternal One, and it is forced to flee. James also said, draw near to God, and He will draw near to you. And I realize the distance between us and Him is not because He is far, but because we have retreated. We have run after other things. When we return, when we wash our hands, when we purify our hearts, when we stop being double-minded, then His presence becomes clear again. And that very presence is the strongest weapon against darkness. I have reflected that submission always goes with repentance, because we cannot submit while still clinging to sin, and true repentance is not empty apology, but brokenness in the heart. It is the cry of recognizing the deception we have held. It is the decision to abandon and return. James wrote, weep, mourn, humble yourselves, because he knew true change cannot come from a superficial attitude. It requires a softened heart, a soul willing to admit weakness so that it may be lifted by grace. I also know that humility is the key for God to act, because He opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble. And this is the paradox of strength. The more one humbles oneself, the more one is exalted. The more one gives up control, the more one finds true freedom. The more one acknowledges weakness, the more one is clothed with the strength of the Almighty. In my experience, the strongest souls are not those who have never fallen, but those who have fallen, have wept, have been broken, but chose to humble themselves under the hand of God and were lifted up. They become evidence that submission does not humiliate. Submission glorifies. I know that many fear yielding because they think they will lose everything. But the truth is, you only lose chains. You lose illusions. You lose useless burdens. And you receive freedom, peace, protection, the presence of a powerful Father. When James calls for submission and resistance, he is not speaking of a ritual. He is speaking of a way of life, a daily choice in every decision, in every temptation, in every anger. You either submit to God and resist the devil, or you compromise with the devil and drift from God. There is no gray zone, no middle ground. Envy and selfish ambition are the root of disorder. And James warned that where these are, there will be confusion and every evil practice. I know this word is not merely to criticize, but to expose the deep cause of brokenness in individuals as well as in communities. Because when the human heart places goals above righteousness, when competition and the desire to grasp blur the truth, it inevitably leads to conflict, jealousy, and destruction. I have clearly seen the difference between one who lives by ambition and one who lives by humility. One side constantly compares, constantly wants to be above others, and in the end, even if they succeed, they have no peace. The other chooses the path of lowering oneself, not chasing false glory. And in that humility, they receive enduring grace. Worldly wisdom often wears the clothing of success. It teaches people to climb higher, to seize at any cost, but the result is a heart full of bitterness, while wisdom from above is pure, peace-loving, gentle, full of mercy, and it produces the fruit of righteousness, not only for oneself, but also for those around. I know that in life, uncontrolled ambition always destroys first the soul of the one who nourishes it, because they are drowned in comparisons, always dissatisfied with their present position, and they turn themselves into slaves of endless competition, while the humble learn the art of contentment, and that very contentment opens up peace that nothing can replace. James showed us the path of healing. It is to humble ourselves before God, to let Him lift us up in His time. And that lifting is not like the lifting of the world. It is not a place of power or outward honor, but the lifting of the inner being, an unshakable firmness, a peace that cannot be stolen. I have reflected that pride and selfish ambition are like a contagious disease. They not only ruin one life, but destroy an entire community. Because one who lives in pride always sows discontent in others. They stir jealousy. They nurture division. And the result is a whole group losing unity. But humility is the opposite. It creates an atmosphere of peace. It encourages respect. It stirs up a spirit of service. And the result is a community built strong. I affirm that humility is not weakness, not ignoring personal worth, but knowing how to place oneself rightly, not seizing the place that belongs to God. And in that lowering, one is lifted up by true grace. I also know that the humble do not need to prove, do not need to argue to protect their worth, because true worth does not come from the recognition of the world, but from the acknowledgement of God. And once you grasp this, you will no longer be shaken by human praise or criticism. James wrote that God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble. And I realize this is a divine law. No matter the era, whoever harbors pride will ultimately fall. But whoever knows how to humble themselves will be given strength beyond human understanding. I want you to think about the conflicts in your life. Often the root cause is not circumstances, but pride. You do not want to lose. You do not want to yield. And therefore, the tension continues. But when you choose humility, you do not lose your value. You only lose the false self, and you gain freedom in the soul. Humility does not mean letting others trample you, but knowing how to discern what is worth holding and what should be released. It helps you hold firm to truth, but without violence. It helps you fight for justice, but with a gentle spirit. And that very thing is what has the true power to transform others. Judging others is a subtle temptation that nearly everyone stumbles into. And James warned that whoever speaks against or judges a brother or sister is placing themselves above the law, becoming a judge instead of one who obeys. But there is only one lawgiver and judge, the one who is able to save and destroy. And who are we that we dare to judge our neighbor? I know that when people fall into the habit of judging, they not only harm the one they judge, but also reveal the pride in their own hearts. Because judgment always implicitly says, I am more right than you. I am cleaner than you. I am qualified to put you beneath me. And that is the most dangerous deception. In truth, when we judge, we are casting a false light on others to avoid the darkness in our own hearts. Instead of facing our personal sins, we choose to scrutinize the faults of others to cover our own flaws, but that false light cannot last. It only exposes hypocrisy even more. James emphasized that judging is not the role of human beings, because humans are only called to live in the law of love. That law says, love your neighbor as yourself. And when we abandon the law of love to take up the law of judgment, we have betrayed the very foundation of faith. I understand that many justify their judgment as being for the sake of justice, but justice is not in our hands. Justice belongs to God. We may discern right from wrong, but we have no right to condemn, because when we condemn, we crown ourselves as God, and that act itself places us in a dangerous position. I recall the words of Jesus who said, remove the plank from your own eye before you attempt to remove the speck from your brother's. And that shows that our own issue is always greater than what we see in others. If we are honest enough to face it, we will have neither time nor mind to judge others. I have reflected that judgment drains the soul. It causes us to lose mercy. Because when we place ourselves in the seat of judge, we lose the ability to stoop down, to lift up. We only point fingers to accuse, and in that very moment we are farther from God than ever, because He is merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in grace, and He calls us to be like Him, not to replace Him. I also see that judgment breeds division. It makes the community lose trust, because everyone lives in fear of being scrutinized, and that fear suffocates love, while true love can only live in the space of safety and acceptance. James did not deny that we need discernment between right and wrong, but discernment is not the same as judgment. Discernment helps us know what to do to live rightly, while judgment makes us an accuser of others, while we ourselves do not live it out. I want you to look back at yourself. How many times have you judged others just to cover your own weakness? How many times have you criticized others while indulging your own sin? And if you are honest, you will realize that judgment never makes you better. It only takes you farther from grace. Humility is the path of true change. And when you humble yourself to realize you need grace no less than others, then you stop holding the mirror to others and turn the mirror on yourself. And in that very moment, true transformation begins. James reminds that there is only one who has power to save and destroy, and that is not you. So who are you to judge your neighbor? This question cuts into pride. It brings us back to our true place, to remember we are only those who receive the law, not those who create the law. Arrogance in planning the future is one of the clearest expressions of a heart that does not submit. And James pointed out that there are people who say today or tomorrow we will go to this city or that, stay there a year, trade and make a profit. But they forget that human life is only like a mist, appearing for a moment and then vanishing. I understand that this word is not meant to forbid people from making plans, but to awaken us from the illusion that we are the absolute masters of destiny, because the truth is, none of us knows what tomorrow will be. The greatest arrogance is not openly opposing God, but living as if we do not need Him, making plans, chasing success, calculating profit without once asking what His will is. James gives a solution that is simple but weighty, that instead of saying we will do this or that, say if the Lord wills, then we will live and do this or that. And this saying is not a formula to repeat mechanically, but the attitude of a heart that knows it only exists by grace, that each breath is a gift and each opportunity is a granting. I have reflected that this attitude does not make people passive. On the contrary, it brings freedom, because when we acknowledge God as master, we no longer carry the burden of controlling every outcome. We can give our best in our part, but let Him decide success or failure. And this letting go removes the fear tied to those who believe everything depends on them. Many people live in constant anxiety because they must keep everything in their hands, always calculating for ad. But then a single unexpected event is enough to shatter the whole plan, and then they collapse because they have no foundation more solid than themselves. While the one who knows to say, if the Lord wills, never collapses, because they have anchored their soul in His sovereignty. They know they are only missed, and that awareness makes them humble and peaceful. I also realize that this arrogance is not only in words, but also in motives. Many plan not to do what is good, but because of greed, to accumulate, to boast, and James warns that boasting like that is evil, because it puts self at the center, excludes God, and turns success into an altar for worshiping oneself. I know that the right attitude is not to stop dreaming or stop working, but to place everything within the framework of God's will, so that each plan, each decision is examined under the question, does this align with Him? And if the answer is no, then no matter how attractive the plan, it is not worth pursuing. The arrogance in planning is more dangerous because it is often considered wisdom. The world praises those who dare to calculate far, who dare to be confident, but in God's eyes, confidence not grounded in Him is only arrogance, and it will soon be brought low when reality exposes the fragility of humanity. I have seen that a soul that admits its own limits will always be stronger than one with false confidence, because its strength does not come from itself, but from the one who holds the future. James concludes this part with a sharp principle that anyone who knows the good they ought to do and does not do it sins. And this word reminds that the problem is not only boasting, but also indifference to responsibility. Many run after personal plans while ignoring the chance to do good before them. And that is also a form of arrogance, because they value their own interests more than God's will. I want you to ask yourself, how are you making plans? Do you let God step into your calculations? Or are you living as if the future lies entirely in your hands? And when you answer honestly, you will know whether your faith is alive or dead. Living faith always shows three attitudes: humility before the fragility of life, dependence on God's will in each decision, and readiness to do good whenever there is opportunity, while any other attitude is hidden arrogance. Faith does not grow in feast days or dramatic events. It grows in the small rhythm of daily life, where we choose a different reaction, a differente attitude, and repeat it until the soul forms a new structure. A timely apology can save a relationship from breaking. A minute of silence before answering can prevent an argument. A fair decision toward the weak can create justice within a small scope. And these are what truly measure faith. James does not call us to wait until we stand before the public to prove faith. He calls us to become doers in the smallest details, because details reveal the truth. While big deeds are sometimes only a passing moment, I understand that many think to live the gospel one must do extraordinary things. But the real extraordinary lies in doing the right thing repeatedly when no one notices, because these choices accumulate into habits, and those habits accumulate into character, and that character shapes destiny. A person who chooses forgiveness instead of revenge every day will become a person of mercy. One who chooses restraint instead of outburst will become a person of peace. One who chooses sharing instead of hoarding will become a person of generosity. And all they are begins from small rhythms. James wrote that be doers of the word, not only hearers. And I know that means let each saying of the gospel enter daily reactions to transform how we respond to a harsh message, a contemptuous look, an opportunity to cheat, because in those places faith is truly tested. I have reflected that small rhythm is like a trickling stream. It does not impress immediately, but it carves deep and reshapes the land. Likewise, persistent small actions carve deep into the soul, engraving the image of the one we follow. Many miss this power because they seek only the big moment. They wait for a grand chance to show faith, but when small opportunities come each day, they ignore them. They let anger erupt. They let selfishness win. They let pride control. And the result is their faith never grows because they do not train in the small. I know that each time we choose to do right in the small, we are laying a new brick for the house of the soul. And after years, that house becomes a firm refuge for others. It is these hidden actions that have the strongest impact, because others will sense the truth in us not through sermons but through daily rhythm. And that rhythm either testifies to the gospel or betrays it. I want you to examine yourself. What does your daily rhythm say? Does it show righteousness, patience, kindness? Or does it show anger, selfishness, shallowness? Because that will determine who you become. A great life is not made in one day. It is woven from countless small days. And it is consistency in those small days that makes the difference. James calls us to live fully, not in distant promises, but in present reactions. And that is where faith proves its life. As I reach the end of this journey, I realize that the entire message of James is not a series of scattered advice, but a consistent picture of living faith, a faith that does not stop at words, but becomes action, not enclosed in theory, but flowing out in every small daily choice. I understand that a belief only to read and hear is like a seed buried but never sprouting, while the faith that James calls for is the seed breaking through the ground, enduring the blows of wind and rain, and then bearing fruit. I have clearly felt that the goal is not safety, but maturity. And maturity can only come through trials, through perseverance, through daring to place oneself under the lordship of God. The words of James are sharp as a sword because he does not want us to live in hypocrisy. He wants us to soberly look at ourselves, to ask whether the faith we profess is truly alive. I have reflected and realized that the power of this message lies in the fact that it does not allow us to be comfortable with half-heartedness. It does not tolerate dead faith. It calls for wholeness, for single-mindedness, and only such single-mindedness brings true peace. I recall each part he emphasized, from patience in trials, seeking wisdom, not being double-minded, to controlling the tongue, living wisdom from above, not judging, not boasting, but humbling before God. And I recognize that all lead to a single center, which is authenticity in the life of faith. I understand that living true is not being perfect, but being faithful. It is not pretending to believe, but truly believing to the point of acting. Not pretending to love, but truly loving to the point of giving. Not pretending to be patient, but truly patient to the point of bearing pressure. And when living true, we are no longer torn by double-mindedness. we are no longer worn down by falsehood. We walk lightly because the soul has been freed from the burden of a shell. I affirm that this is the key point. Living faith is freedom. Freedom to love, to forgive, to sacrifice, to choose what is right without being bound by fear or calculation. I also know that the echo of James' words does not only resound in the individual, but also in the community. Because a community built from people of living faith will become evidence to the world, evidence that the gospel is not a doctrine, but a power that transforms life. I have seen in vision such communities like a city on a hill. Their light cannot be hidden, and every small act of theirs becomes a ray of light shining into the surrounding darkness. And I know that this call is also for us today, not to be satisfied with going to church, reading the Bible, praying with lips, but to let all those things permeate the rhythm of daily life, so that the gospel is no longer theory, but becomes breath. I have learned that precisely in ordinary moments, when we must choose forgiveness instead of holding anger, when we must choose sharing instead of keeping, when we must choose silence instead of answering with bitterness, our faith is proven, and in repeated perseverance, we become new persons. Our souls take on a different form, no longer bound by the old self. The crystallized realization here is to see that the whole life of faith does not lie in extraordinary moments, but in faithfulness to the small things. And it is precisely that faithfulness that creates extraordinary power. The lingering resonance within me is the unceasing call of James that we must become doers, and not only hearers, must become actors, and not only speakers, must let our faith become visible for the whole world to see